At the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., General Patricia Adams was reviewing classified reports from the Outer Rim colonies when her aide, Major Kevin Torres, knocked on her office door. General Adams was one of the most respected four-star generals in the Marine Corps, known for her direct leadership style and fierce loyalty to the Marines under her command. "General, I have an urgent matter that requires your attention," Major Torres said as he entered the office. "It concerns Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson." General Adams looked up from her reports. She knew that name well. Marcus Johnson was the Marine sniper who had single-handedly saved the New Titan colony just 6 months earlier. His actions during that mission had been so extraordinary that Adams had personally recommended him for the Congressional Medal of Honor. "What about Staff Sergeant Johnson?" Adams asked, concerned that something might have happened to one of her most decorated Marines. Major Torres explained the situation in Chicago, including Marcus's arrest, the wrongful charges, and the ongoing court proceedings. As Torres spoke, General Adams felt her anger rising. The idea that a Marine of Marcus Johnson's caliber was being treated like a common criminal was unacceptable to her. "Major, get me the complete file on Staff Sergeant Johnson's service record, including all classified materials from the New Titan mission," Adams ordered. "Also, get me on the phone with Colonel Harrison at Camp Pendleton immediately." While Torres worked to gather the requested information, General Adams called her contacts at Marine Corps headquarters to learn more about the situation. What she discovered made her even more concerned. Marcus had been recommended for the highest military honors, but the paperwork was still working its way through the system due to the classified nature of his mission. Colonel Harrison answered his phone on the second ring. "General Adams, I was hoping to hear from you about this situation. Steve, I want you to tell me everything you know about what happened to Staff Sergeant Johnson," Adams said firmly. Harrison explained the timeline of events, from Danny Martinez's initial concern about Marcus being missing to the discovery that he was being held by Chicago police. Adams listened carefully, taking notes about each step of the process. "General, there's something else you should know," Harrison continued. "The mission that Marcus completed on New Titan is still classified, so the civilian authorities have no idea what he actually accomplished out there." General Adams understood the implications immediately. Marcus Johnson wasn't just any Marine who had been wrongfully arrested. He was a genuine war hero whose actions had saved thousands of civilian lives, and the people treating him like a criminal had no idea of his true service to his country. "Colonel, I want you to prepare a complete briefing package on the New Titan mission," Adams instructed. "Include everything we can declassify about Staff Sergeant Johnson's actions. I may need to take this information to Chicago myself." After ending the call with Harrison, General Adams spent the next several hours reviewing Marcus's complete service record. What she read confirmed everything she already knew about his character and abilities. Marcus had consistently exceeded expectations throughout his Marine Corps career, and his performance on New Titan had been nothing short of heroic. The New Titan mission had been one of the most dangerous operations in recent memory. The colony had been under siege by alien raiders for weeks, and the civilian population was trapped with no way to evacuate. Marcus had been part of a small Marine unit, tasked with breaking the siege and protecting the civilians. During the mission, Marcus had positioned himself in the mountains surrounding the main settlement and had systematically eliminated enemy snipers who were preventing rescue operations. Working alone for 3 days with minimal sleep and supplies, he had taken out over 40 enemy positions, allowing Marine ground forces to reach the trapped civilians. The most remarkable part of Marcus's performance had been his final action during the mission. When the alien raiders launched a desperate final assault on the civilian shelters, Marcus had held his position despite being surrounded and outnumbered. His precise shooting had broken the enemy attack and saved the lives of over 10,000 colonists. General Adams had been following the mission from headquarters, and she remembered the moment when Marcus's commanding officer had reported that the siege was broken. It had been one of the most successful defensive operations in the history of human space colonization. Now, reading about Marcus's arrest in Chicago, General Adams felt a deep sense of injustice. Here was a Marine who had risked everything to protect innocent civilians, and he was being treated as a criminal by the very people he had sworn to protect. General Adams called her legal officer, Captain Lisa Chen, to discuss the situation. Chen had experience with cases involving military personnel in civilian courts, and Adams wanted her opinion on how to proceed. "Captain, I need to know what options we have to intervene in this Chicago case," Adams said. Chen reviewed the basic facts of the situation. "General, we have several options. We can provide character witnesses. We can declassify certain aspects of Staff Sergeant Johnson's service record, or you could personally appear to testify on his behalf." "What would have the most impact?" Adams asked. "Your personal appearance would certainly get attention," Chen replied. "A four-star general doesn't appear in civilian court very often, especially to defend an enlisted Marine." General Adams made her decision quickly. "Captain, I want you to contact the court in Chicago and inform them that I will be appearing as a character witness for Staff Sergeant Johnson. Also, prepare the necessary paperwork to declassify the essential details of the new Titan mission." Chen understood the significance of the general's decision. "Ma'am, are you sure you want to take this step? It will definitely create a lot of publicity." "Captain, Marcus Johnson saved 10,000 civilian lives 6 months ago," Adams replied firmly. "The least I can do is save his reputation now." Word of General Adams's decision spread quickly through Marine Corps channels. Within hours, Colonel Harrison at Camp Pendleton had received calls from Marines who had served with Marcus, all offering to testify on his behalf. The case was becoming much bigger than anyone in Chicago had anticipated. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Marcus was unaware that such high-level attention was being focused on his case. He was staying with his sister Nina and trying to prepare for the continuation of his court hearing. Carl Washington had told him that additional witnesses might be called, but Marcus had no idea that a four-star general was planning to appear on his behalf. Nina noticed that Marcus seemed more relaxed than he had since his arrest. The support from fellow veterans and the media attention seemed to have convinced him that justice would ultimately prevail. "I never expected so many people to care about what happened to me," Marcus told his sister over dinner. "Marcus, you've spent 6 years serving your country," Nina replied. "People understand that you deserve better treatment than what you received." That evening, Carl Washington called Marcus with surprising news. "Marcus, I just received a call from the Pentagon. General Patricia Adams wants to testify as a character witness in your case." Marcus was stunned. He knew who General Adams was, and he couldn't believe that such a high-ranking officer would take personal interest in his situation. "Mr. Washington, are you sure about this?" Marcus asked. "I'm sure," Washington replied. "Apparently, General Adams is very familiar with your service record, and she wants to make sure the court understands exactly who you are and what you've accomplished." As Marcus prepared for bed that night, he thought about the strange turn his life had taken. A week ago, he had been a Marine trying to adjust to civilian life. Now he was at the center of a case that was attracting national attention and the personal support of one of the most powerful generals in the military. He still didn't fully understand why his case had become so important to so many people, but he was grateful for the support and determined to see the matter through to a just conclusion. Tuesday morning brought an even larger crowd to the Cook County Courthouse. Word had spread overnight that a four-star general would be appearing in the Marcus Johnson case, and news crews from national networks had joined the local media. Veterans from across the Midwest had traveled to Chicago to show their support, and the courthouse steps were filled with people holding American flags and signs supporting Marcus. Inside the courthouse, Judge Margaret Stone was preparing for what she now understood would be a much more significant hearing than she had originally anticipated. Her clerk had informed her that General Patricia Adams would be arriving shortly, and Stone was curious about what the general might reveal about Marcus Johnson's military service. Marcus arrived at the courthouse with his sister Nina and lawyer Carl Washington, again wearing his dress blue uniform. As they walked through the crowd, Marcus was approached by several veterans who thanked him for his service and expressed their support. The attention still felt strange to Marcus, who had always been a private person. Carl Washington had spent much of the previous evening on the phone with military legal officers, preparing for General Adams' testimony. He had been given some basic information about Marcus's service on New Titan, but many details remained classified. Washington understood that whatever the general revealed in court would likely be significant. Assistant District Attorney Helen Park was feeling increasingly uncomfortable about the case. What had started as a simple matter of dropping charges against a wrongfully arrested suspect had become a major public relations challenge for the police department and the prosecutor's office. Park had received several calls from her supervisors asking her to resolve the matter as quickly as possible. Detective Ryan Clark and Police Chief Robert Kane were both present in the courtroom, looking nervous about the attention the case was receiving. Kane in particular was worried about how the department would be portrayed in the media if the hearing revealed serious misconduct by his officers. At exactly 10 o'clock, the courtroom doors opened and General Patricia Adams entered, accompanied by 2 military aides. The general was an impressive figure in her dress blue uniform, with 4 stars clearly visible on her shoulders and rows of ribbons across her chest. The entire courtroom fell silent as she walked down the center aisle. Marcus stood at attention when he saw General Adams, as did several veterans in the gallery. The general nodded to Marcus with a slight smile before taking her seat in the witness area. Judge Stone called the court to order and addressed the unexpected presence of such a high-ranking military officer. General Adams, I understand you've requested to testify as a character witness for Staff Sergeant Johnson. General Adams stood and spoke in a clear, commanding voice. Yes, Your Honor. I have information about Staff Sergeant Johnson's service record that I believe is essential for this court to understand. Carl Washington approached the bench. Your Honor, I request permission to call General Adams as a witness at this time. Judge Stone granted the request and General Adams was sworn in. As she took the witness stand, the courtroom remained completely silent. Even the court reporters seemed to sense that they were about to hear something extraordinary. Washington began his questioning carefully. General Adams, can you please state your position and relationship to Staff Sergeant Johnson? I am General Patricia Adams, a 4-star general in the United States Marine Corps, she replied. I am the commanding general responsible for Marine operations in the Outer Rim colonies, including the mission that Staff Sergeant Johnson recently completed on New Titan. General, are you familiar with Staff Sergeant Johnson's service record? I am intimately familiar with his service record, Adams replied. In fact, I personally recommended Staff Sergeant Johnson for the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions during the New Titan mission. A murmur went through the courtroom. The Congressional Medal of Honor was the highest military decoration in the United States, and very few people had ever received it. Judge Stone leaned forward with obvious interest. Washington continued his questioning. General, can you tell the court about the New Titan mission? General Adams looked directly at Judge Stone as she began to speak. Your Honor, 6 months ago, the civilian colony on New Titan came under attack by hostile alien forces. Over 10,000 civilians were trapped in the main settlement, unable to evacuate due to enemy sniper positions in the surrounding mountains. She paused for a moment before continuing. Staff Sergeant Johnson was part of a small Marine unit sent to break the siege and protect those civilians. What he accomplished during that mission was extraordinary by any measure. Can you be more specific about Staff Sergeant Johnson's actions? Washington asked. Staff Sergeant Johnson positioned himself alone in the mountains surrounding the colony, Adams explained. For 3 days, with minimal food, water, or rest, he systematically eliminated enemy sniper positions that were preventing our rescue operations. His precise shooting allowed our ground forces to reach the trapped civilians. The courtroom was completely silent as General Adams continued her testimony. On the final day of the mission, when the enemy launched a desperate assault on the civilian shelters, Staff Sergeant Johnson held his position despite being surrounded and outnumbered. His actions that day directly saved the lives of over 10,000 American citizens. Judge Stone was clearly moved by the testimony. General Adams, are you saying that Staff Sergeant Johnson is a war hero? Your Honor, Marcus Johnson is more than a war hero, Adams replied firmly. He is one of the finest Marines I have ever had the privilege to command, and his actions on New Titan represent the very best of American military tradition. Carl Washington asked one final question. General, in your professional opinion, is Staff Sergeant Johnson capable of committing armed robbery? General Adams looked directly at Marcus before answering. Mr. Washington, the idea that Marcus Johnson would commit any crime is not just unlikely, it is impossible. This is a Marine who risked his life to protect innocent civilians he had never met. The suggestion that he would harm or threaten any American citizen is completely contrary to everything he represents. During cross-examination, Assistant District Attorney Park asked only a few basic questions. It was clear that she had no desire to challenge the testimony of a four-star general about a Medal of Honor recipient. After General Adams completed her testimony, she stood and approached Marcus at the defendant's table. The general extended her hand to Marcus, who stood and shook it firmly. "Staff Sergeant Johnson, I want to formally apologize to you on behalf of the United States Marine Corps for the treatment you have received," General Adams said loudly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "You have served your country with extraordinary distinction, and you deserve far better than this." Marcus remained at attention. "Thank you, General. It's an honor to serve under your command." General Adams then turned to address Judge Stone directly. "Your Honor, I have brought with me the paperwork to officially present Staff Sergeant Johnson with the Congressional Medal of Honor, which has been approved but not yet formally awarded. With the court's permission, I would like to present this decoration now." Judge Stone was clearly surprised but granted permission for the ceremony. General Adams' aide brought forward a presentation case containing the medal, and the general asked Marcus to stand before the bench. "Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson, by order of the President of the United States and with the authorization of Congress, you are hereby awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of your life above and beyond the call of duty during combat operations on New Titan." General Adams placed the medal around Marcus's neck as the entire courtroom erupted in applause. Veterans in the gallery stood and saluted while others wiped tears from their eyes. Even some of the police officers present seemed moved by the ceremony. Detective Clark watched the proceedings with a growing sense of shame. He realized that he had not only arrested an innocent man, but had arrested one of the most decorated heroes in the Marine Corps. The magnitude of his mistake was becoming clear to everyone in the courtroom. Judge Stone allowed the applause to continue for several minutes before calling for order. When the courtroom finally quieted, she looked at the prosecution table with obvious displeasure. "Ms. Park, does the state have anything to add before I issue my ruling in this matter?" Judge Stone asked. Assistant District Attorney Park stood slowly. "Your Honor, in light of the testimony we have heard today, the state formally apologizes to Staff Sergeant Johnson and requests that all charges be dismissed with prejudice." Judge Stone nodded grimly. "The charges are dismissed with prejudice, and the record will reflect that Staff Sergeant Johnson was completely innocent of any wrongdoing. This court finds that he was wrongfully arrested and that his civil rights were violated." As the hearing concluded, General Adams spoke privately with Marcus about his future in the Marine Corps and thanked him again for his extraordinary service. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the impact of what had happened that day would be felt far beyond the courthouse walls. Monday morning arrived with an unusual amount of activity at the Cook County Courthouse. Word had spread through veterans groups and civil rights organizations about Marcus Johnson's case, and several dozen supporters had gathered outside the building. Local news crews were setting up their equipment, having picked up the story over the weekend. Marcus arrived at the courthouse with his sister Nina and his lawyer Carl Washington. He wore his dress blue military uniform, which Washington had suggested to remind everyone in the courtroom of Marcus's service to his country. The uniform was perfectly pressed, and Marcus's numerous ribbons and decorations were displayed prominently on his chest. As they walked through the crowd of supporters, Marcus was surprised by the turnout. Many of the people there were veterans themselves, and they nodded respectfully as he passed. Some held signs that read, "Justice for our heroes" and "Support our veterans." Inside the courthouse, Judge Margaret Stone was preparing for what she had been told would be a routine hearing to dismiss charges against a wrongfully arrested suspect. Stone had been a federal judge for 12 years and was known for her fairness and attention to detail. She had reviewed the basic facts of the case, but was not yet aware of the full scope of Marcus's military service. The prosecution was being handled by Assistant District Attorney Helen Park, who had been assigned to the case that morning. Park had only briefly reviewed the file and understood that the police department wanted the charges dropped quickly and quietly. She was expecting a simple procedural hearing. Detective Ryan Clark was present in the courtroom, along with Lieutenant Kate Foster and Police Chief Robert Kane. They all hoped the hearing would resolve the matter without too much public attention, but they were concerned by the media presence outside. Marcus and his legal team took their seats at the defendant's table. Washington had prepared extensively over the weekend, gathering documentation of Marcus's military service and character references from his commanding officers. He was not planning to simply accept a dismissal of charges, but intended to use the hearing to highlight the injustice that had occurred. Judge Stone called the court to order at 9 o'clock sharp. "We're here today regarding the case of the People versus Marcus Johnson. I understand there's a motion to dismiss all charges." Assistant District Attorney Park stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. After further investigation, the state has determined that the charges against Mr. Johnson should be dismissed. The evidence indicates that Mr. Johnson was not involved in the robbery for which he was arrested." Judge Stone looked at the prosecution table. "Ms. Park, can you explain how Mr. Johnson came to be charged with a crime he didn't commit?" Park seemed uncomfortable with the question. "Your Honor, Mr. Johnson was arrested based on the information available to the officers at the time. Upon further review, it became clear that there had been a misidentification." Carl Washington stood up. "Your Honor, I would like to address the court on behalf of my client before any dismissal is entered." Judge Stone nodded. "Proceed, Mr. Washington." Washington walked to the center of the courtroom. "Your Honor, my client, Marine Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson, was not simply misidentified. He was profiled, arrested without proper cause, and held in custody despite providing clear evidence of his identity and character from the moment of his arrest." The lawyer gestured toward Marcus. "Staff Sergeant Johnson is a decorated United States Marine who recently returned from a classified deployment protecting American citizens on one of our Outer Rim colonies. He has served his country with distinction for 6 years and has never been arrested for any crime." Judge Stone looked more carefully at Marcus for the first time, noting his military uniform and the impressive array of ribbons on his chest. "Mr. Washington, what exactly are you asking the court to do?" "Your Honor, we're asking that this court not simply dismiss the charges, but that it make a formal finding that Staff Sergeant Johnson was wrongfully arrested and that his civil rights were violated," Washington replied. "We want a clear record that he is completely innocent of any wrongdoing." Assistant District Attorney Park objected. "Your Honor, a simple dismissal of charges is sufficient to clear Mr. Johnson's record. There's no need for additional findings." Washington was prepared for this response. "Your Honor, my client's reputation and career could be affected by this arrest for years to come. Military personnel undergo regular security clearance reviews, and even dismissed charges can raise questions. Staff Sergeant Johnson deserves more than just having charges dropped. He deserves vindication." Judge Stone considered both arguments. "I'm inclined to hear more about the circumstances of this arrest before making any rulings. Mr. Washington, would you like to call witnesses?" "Yes, Your Honor. I call Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson to testify." Marcus walked to the witness stand and was sworn in. Washington began by asking Marcus to describe his military background and recent service. Marcus spoke clearly and proudly about his 6 years in the Marines, his specialized training as a sniper, and his recent deployment to New Titan. "Staff Sergeant Johnson, can you tell the court about your actions during the deployment to New Titan?" Washington asked. Marcus was careful not to reveal classified information, but he described the general nature of the mission. "Sir, my unit was assigned to protect civilian settlements from hostile forces. My role as a sniper was to provide overwatch and eliminate threats to the civilian population." "Were you successful in that mission?" "Yes, sir. My unit was able to protect the settlements and prevent civilian casualties." Washington then asked Marcus to describe the events in Grant Park that led to his arrest. Marcus recounted the afternoon in detail, explaining how he had been sitting peacefully when the robbery occurred, and how he had tried to cooperate with police despite their refusal to properly check his identification. "Staff Sergeant Johnson, did you resist arrest or give the officers any reason to doubt your identity?" Washington asked. "No, sir. I provided my military ID, my driver's license, and my VA appointment card immediately. I also offered to have the officers contact my commanding officer to verify my identity." "And did the officers make any effort to verify your identity or service record?" "No, sir. They did not." Assistant District Attorney Park cross-examined Marcus briefly, but her questions were mostly procedural. She seemed uncomfortable challenging the testimony of someone in military uniform with such an obvious record of service. After Marcus's testimony, Washington called Nina Johnson to the stand. Nina described her brother's character and his difficulty adjusting to civilian life after his deployment. She also testified about the frantic search for Marcus when he failed to appear for their dinner appointment. The next witness was Danny Martinez, Marcus's fellow Marine, who had flown in from California over the weekend. Danny testified about Marcus's exemplary service record and his reputation among his fellow Marines. Corporal Martinez, in your opinion, is Staff Sergeant Johnson capable of committing armed robbery? Washington asked. Absolutely not, sir, Danny replied firmly. Marcus Johnson is one of the most honest and honorable people I've ever known. The idea of him committing any crime is completely ridiculous. Detective Clark was called to testify about the arrest and investigation. Under questioning from Washington, Clark admitted that he had not made any effort to verify Marcus's military service claims, despite having multiple forms of identification available. Detective Clark, you had Staff Sergeant Johnson's military ID, his driver's license, and his VA appointment card. Correct, Washington asked. Yes, that's correct. And you made no phone calls to verify his identity with the VA hospital, the Marine Corps, or any other agency? Clark shifted uncomfortably. We were following standard procedure for processing an arrest. Detective, is it standard procedure to ignore evidence that might prove a suspect's innocence? Assistant District Attorney Park objected, but Judge Stone allowed the question. Clark admitted that he probably should have made more effort to verify Marcus's claims. As the hearing continued, it became clear that Marcus had been treated unfairly from the moment of his arrest. Judge Stone was clearly troubled by what she was hearing, and her questions to the police witnesses became increasingly pointed. The hearing was taking much longer than the police department had expected, and Chief Kane was becoming visibly nervous about the publicity the case was generating. Outside the courthouse, the crowd of supporters had grown, and news crews were broadcasting live updates. By the end of the day, Judge Stone had heard enough testimony to understand that this was more than just a simple case of mistaken identity. She announced that she would take the matter under advisement and issue a ruling the following day. The Chicago police station was busier than usual for a Thursday afternoon. Marcus was led through the main entrance still wearing handcuffs, drawing curious looks from other officers and civilians waiting in the lobby. The fluorescent lights were harsh after the warm sunlight of the park, and the smell of coffee and disinfectant filled the air. Officer Murphy guided Marcus to a hard plastic chair near the booking desk, while Rodriguez went to speak with the desk sergeant. Marcus sat quietly observing the activity around him. He had been in military detention facilities before during training exercises, but never as an actual suspect in a crime. Sergeant Paula White looked up from her computer as Rodriguez approached with Marcus's identification documents. White had been working at the station for 12 years and had seen all kinds of arrests. She glanced at the military ID and VA card but didn't examine them closely. What do we have here? White asked, typing information into her computer. Robbery suspect from Grant Park, Murphy answered, joining them at the desk. Claims he's military, but you know how that goes. White nodded and began the standard booking process. She took Marcus's fingerprints and photographed him from multiple angles. During this process, she noticed several tattoos on Marcus's arms that clearly indicated military service, including one with his unit designation and dates of service. These tattoos look legitimate, White mentioned to Murphy. Murphy shrugged. People get fake military tattoos all the time. We need to process him properly and let the detectives figure out if his story checks out. Marcus was then led to a small interview room where Detective Ryan Clark was waiting. Clark had been with the Chicago Police Department for 15 years and considered himself good at reading people. He had already decided that Marcus was probably lying about his military service before they even met. Have a seat, Clark said, gesturing to a metal chair across from a small table. Let's start with your name and address. Marcus provided his information clearly and calmly. He explained again that he was a Marine who had recently returned from deployment and was visiting his sister in Chicago. He described exactly where he had been sitting in the park and what he had observed during the robbery. Clark listened but seemed skeptical of every detail. So you're telling me you're some kind of elite soldier, and you just happened to be in the park when this robbery occurred? I'm a Marine sniper, and yes, I was in the park visiting after my VA appointment, Marcus replied patiently. The appointment card is in my wallet, and you can call the hospital to verify I was there today. Anyone can make an appointment at the VA, Clark said dismissively. What I want to know is why you were really in that park, and what your connection is to the robbery. Marcus felt his frustration growing but maintained his composure. Detective, I have no connection to any robbery. I've provided you with multiple forms of identification, including my military ID. I'm asking you to contact my commanding officer at Camp Pendleton to verify my identity and service record. Clark made a note on his pad, but didn't seem interested in making any phone calls. We'll look into your story, but right now the evidence suggests you were involved in this crime. What evidence? Marcus asked. I was sitting on a bench when the robbery happened. There were witnesses who saw me there. The timing is suspicious, Clark replied, and you match the general description we received. Marcus knew that the general description was probably just that the suspect was a black male, which could describe thousands of people in Chicago. He had encountered this kind of profiling before, both in civilian life and unfortunately sometimes even in the military. After the interview, Marcus was placed in a holding cell with several other people who had been arrested that day. The cell was small and crowded with a single bench and a toilet in the corner. Marcus found a spot against the wall and sat down to wait. One of the other inmates, a man named Kevin who had been arrested for a minor drug charge, struck up a conversation. What they get you for? Robbery, apparently, Marcus answered. Though I didn't commit any robbery. Kevin laughed bitterly. Yeah, we're all innocent in here. What's your real story? Marcus explained briefly what had happened in the park. Kevin listened and seemed genuinely surprised. Man, you really don't seem like a robber. You got that military bearing thing going on. I am military, Marcus said. That's what I've been trying to tell them. Meanwhile, Marcus's sister Nina was starting to worry. She had texted him about their dinner plans but hadn't received a response, which was unusual for Marcus. He was always very reliable about staying in touch. She tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. Nina decided to drive to Marcus's hotel to check on him. The desk clerk told her that Marcus had left that morning for his VA appointment but hadn't returned. Nina's worry increased. She knew Marcus had been dealing with some adjustment issues since returning from deployment, and she hoped nothing serious had happened. Back at the police station, the real robbery suspect was caught on security camera footage from a store 2 blocks away from the park. The footage clearly showed a man who looked nothing like Marcus, but Detective Clark had not yet reviewed the tapes. The evidence technician who discovered the footage had left it on Clark's desk with a note, but Clark was busy with other cases. As evening approached, Marcus asked Sergeant White about making a phone call. He wanted to contact Nina to let her know what had happened and to ask her to help get him a lawyer. You'll get your phone call when we're ready to give it to you, White replied curtly. Marcus also requested to speak with someone from the military legal office, but this request was denied as well. The officers seemed determined to treat him as just another criminal suspect, rather than investigating his claims about his military service. Hours passed in the holding cell. Marcus watched the clock on the wall move slowly toward evening. He thought about his unit back at Camp Pendleton and wondered if they had any idea what was happening to him. He also thought about the mission on New Titan and how ironic it was that he could protect an entire colony from alien attack but couldn't protect himself from being wrongly arrested in his own country. Kevin was released around dinner time, and Marcus wished him luck. As Kevin left, he told Marcus he hoped things worked out for him. You seem like good people, Kevin said. I hope they figure out their mistake soon. Marcus appreciated the support, even from someone he had just met. It reminded him that most people were fundamentally decent, even in difficult circumstances. As night fell, Marcus was still in the holding cell, still waiting for someone to take his claims seriously and investigate his true identity. Friday morning arrived with Detective Ryan Clark feeling increasingly uncomfortable about the Marcus Johnson case. Overnight, he had finally reviewed the security camera footage from the robbery, and it clearly showed that the real suspect looked nothing like the man they had in custody. The actual robber was shorter, heavier, and had distinctive facial hair that Marcus clearly did not have. Clark sat at his desk, staring at the footage on his computer screen, realizing that a serious mistake had been made. He had been a detective for 15 years and had made errors before, but this felt different. The man in custody had been calm, respectful, and consistent in his story from the beginning. Clark was beginning to believe that Marcus Johnson really was who he claimed to be. The detective's phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller identified herself as Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake from the Navy Legal Office, and she was asking pointed questions about Marcus Johnson's arrest and current status. "Detective Clark, I'm calling regarding Marcus Johnson, a United States Marine who was arrested yesterday in your jurisdiction," Blake said in a professional but firm tone. "I need to understand the circumstances of his arrest and his current status." Clark felt his stomach drop. Military legal calling about a case was never a good sign, especially when he was already having doubts about the arrest. "Ma'am, Mr. Johnson was arrested as a suspect in an armed robbery. He's currently being held pending charges. Detective, I've reviewed Marine Johnson's service record, and I can assure you that he is a highly decorated member of our armed forces with no criminal history whatsoever." Blake continued, "Have you verified his identity and service claims?" Clark realized he had not made any effort to verify Marcus's military service, despite having his military ID and other documentation. "We're still investigating the case, ma'am." "I see," Blake replied. "I'll be in touch with your department leadership regarding this matter. Marine Johnson should be treated with the respect due to his service and record." After the call ended, Clark immediately went to speak with his supervisor, Lieutenant Kate Foster. Foster had been expecting this conversation since she had received her own call from military legal that morning. "Ryan, we need to talk about the Johnson case," Foster said, as Clark entered her office. "I've been getting calls from military lawyers, and apparently this guy really is who he says he is." Clark explained about the security footage and his growing belief that they had arrested the wrong person. Foster listened grimly, understanding that the situation was becoming more complicated by the hour. "Here's what we're going to do," Foster decided. "We're going to quietly release him this morning. No charges filed. No paperwork that makes this look like a big deal. We'll chalk it up to a misunderstanding and move on." Clark thought about this approach. "Lieutenant, Johnson has been asking for a proper hearing to clear his record. He's not going to be satisfied with just being quietly released." "Then we'll make him satisfied," Foster replied. "We'll offer him whatever he needs to make this go away quietly. The last thing this department needs is a lawsuit from a decorated Marine." Foster called Police Chief Robert Kane to inform him of the situation. Kane had been chief for 8 years and was very concerned about public relations and the department's image in the community. The idea of a wrongful arrest of a military hero was exactly the kind of story that could damage the department's reputation. "Handle this quietly and quickly," Kane instructed Foster. "Do whatever it takes to make this Marine happy and willing to move on." Meanwhile, Marcus had spent an uncomfortable night in the holding cell. He had been given a thin blanket and a small pillow, but sleep had been difficult on the hard bench. Other inmates had come and gone during the night, and Marcus had tried to help keep the peace when tensions arose between some of the other prisoners. Around 8 in the morning, Sergeant Paula White came to the holding cell. "Johnson, you're coming with me," she said, unlocking the cell door. Marcus was led back to the interview room where Detective Clark was waiting with a different attitude than the day before. Clark seemed nervous and was avoiding direct eye contact. "Mr. Johnson, we've reviewed your case overnight, and it appears there may have been some confusion yesterday," Clark began carefully. "Confusion," Marcus repeated. "Detective, I told you from the beginning that I was innocent and that I'm a United States Marine." "What kind of confusion are we talking about?" Clark shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We've found evidence that suggests you were not involved in the robbery. We're prepared to release you immediately with no charges filed." Marcus leaned forward slightly. "I appreciate that you've discovered what I've been telling you all along, but I want more than just a quiet release. I want my record completely cleared, and I want a formal acknowledgement that a mistake was made." "That might not be necessary," Clark said quickly. "We can handle this informally. You walk out of here and we all move on with our lives." Marcus shook his head firmly. "Detective, I've served my country for 6 years, including a recent deployment where I risked my life to protect American citizens. Yesterday I was treated like a criminal despite having done nothing wrong. I'm not going to just walk away and pretend this didn't happen." Clark excused himself and went to speak with Lieutenant Foster again. Foster was frustrated that Marcus wasn't willing to accept a quiet resolution. "What exactly does he want?" Foster asked. He wants a formal hearing to clear his record completely. He wants acknowledgement that we made a mistake, Clark explained. Foster sighed. Fine. We'll give him his hearing, but we'll make sure it's just a formality. Judge Stone handles most of our quick hearings, and she'll understand what we need. What Foster didn't realize was that Marcus's sister, Nina, had been busy overnight as well. After learning that Marcus was in custody, Nina had contacted several civil rights organizations and veterans advocacy groups. She had also reached out to a lawyer named Carl Washington, who specialized in cases involving wrongful arrest and civil rights violations. Washington had agreed to take Marcus's case and was already preparing for a more substantial legal fight than the police department was expecting. He understood that this case could have broader implications for how law enforcement treated veterans and minorities. By midday, arrangements had been made for a hearing the following Monday before Judge Margaret Stone. The police department assumed this would be a quick formality where charges would be dropped and everyone would move on. Marcus was finally released on his own recognizance Friday afternoon. Nina was waiting for him outside the police station, and she hugged him tightly when he emerged. "I'm so sorry this happened to you," Nina said, tears in her eyes. Marcus hugged his sister back. "It's not your fault, Nina, but I'm going to make sure it gets handled properly." As they walked to Nina's car, Marcus explained what had happened and his decision to pursue a formal hearing. Nina supported his decision completely. "You shouldn't have to just accept being treated badly because it's convenient for them," Nina said. "You've earned better than that." That evening, Marcus met with his lawyer, Carl Washington, for the first time. Washington was an experienced civil rights attorney who understood the complexities of cases involving law enforcement and military personnel. "Marcus, I want you to understand that pursuing this case might bring a lot of attention," Washington explained. "Are you prepared for that?" Marcus thought about the question carefully. "Mr. Washington, if speaking up about what happened to me can help prevent it from happening to someone else, then yes, I'm prepared for whatever comes." Washington smiled and shook Marcus's hand. "Then let's get you the justice you deserve." At Camp Pendleton in California, Corporal Danny Martinez was getting worried. He had been trying to reach Marcus for 3 hours, and every call went straight to voicemail. Danny and Marcus had served together on New Titan, and they had planned to meet up while Marcus was visiting Chicago. They had made these plans weeks ago, and Marcus was never the type to just disappear without explanation. Danny decided to call Marcus's sister Nina, whose number Marcus had given him for emergencies. When Nina answered, she sounded stressed and worried. "Danny, thank God you called," Nina said. "I can't find Marcus anywhere. He was supposed to meet me for dinner hours ago, and he's not answering his phone." "That's not like him at all," Danny replied. "Marcus is the most reliable person I know." "Something must be wrong." Nina explained that she had already checked Marcus's hotel and the VA hospital. No one had seen him since his appointment that morning. Danny suggested they contact the police to file a missing person report, but Nina had already tried that. The police told her she had to wait 24 hours unless there was evidence of foul play. After ending the call with Nina, Danny felt increasingly concerned. He knew Marcus had been dealing with some difficult memories from their deployment, but Marcus had seemed to be handling everything well. Danny decided to contact their former commanding officer, Colonel Steve Harrison, who might be able to help track down Marcus through official channels. Colonel Harrison was in his office at Camp Pendleton when Danny called. Harrison remembered both Danny and Marcus well from their service on New Titan. They had been part of an elite unit that had performed exceptionally under extremely dangerous conditions. "Corporal Martinez, what can I do for you?" Harrison asked when Danny explained why he was calling. Danny described the situation with Marcus missing in Chicago. Harrison immediately became concerned. He knew that veterans sometimes struggled with civilian life after difficult deployments, and he also knew that Marcus carried a heavy burden from their mission on New Titan. "I'll make some calls and see what I can find out," Harrison promised. "In the meantime, keep trying to reach him and let me know if you hear anything." Harrison's first call was to the VA hospital in Chicago, where Marcus had his appointment. The staff confirmed that Marcus had been there that morning and had seemed fine during his visit. His next call was to the Chicago Police Department, but the desk sergeant he spoke with claimed they had no record of anyone named Marcus Johnson being brought in. What Harrison didn't know was that Marcus had been booked under a slightly different name due to a clerical error, and the desk sergeant was looking in the wrong part of the computer system. Back in Chicago, Nina was driving around the city looking for any sign of her brother. She stopped at several hospitals to see if Marcus had been brought in as a patient, but found nothing. She was starting to consider more serious possibilities, like whether Marcus might have had some kind of psychological crisis related to his military service. Nina knew that Marcus didn't talk much about what had happened during his deployment, but she could tell it had affected him deeply. Sometimes she caught him staring off into space with a look of sadness in his eyes. Other times he would react strongly to sudden loud noises or unexpected movements. As she drove through the city, Nina tried to think like Marcus would think. Where would he go if he was having problems? She remembered that he had mentioned wanting to visit Grant Park because it reminded him of a place they used to go as children. She decided to drive there and look around. When Nina arrived at Grant Park, she noticed yellow police tape around part of the area near the lake. She approached a security guard who was still on duty and asked what had happened. "There was a robbery earlier today," the guard explained. "Police arrested someone, but I think they got the wrong guy. There was this military-looking fellow who was just sitting on a bench when it all went down." Nina's heart started racing. The description sounded like it could be Marcus. She asked the guard for more details, and he described seeing a tall black man in civilian clothes being handcuffed and taken away by police, despite protests from some witnesses that he hadn't done anything wrong. Nina immediately drove to the nearest police station and demanded to speak with someone about her brother. The desk sergeant was the same one who had told Colonel Harrison that no one named Marcus Johnson was in custody. "I need to see if my brother was arrested here today," Nina told the sergeant. "His name is Marcus Johnson and he's a Marine." The sergeant checked his computer again, this time more carefully. He found the booking record, but it was listed under Mark Johnson instead of Marcus Johnson due to the clerical error during processing. "We do have a Mark Johnson who was brought in today for robbery," the sergeant admitted. "But visiting hours are over and he won't be seeing anyone until tomorrow." Nina insisted that there had been a mistake and that her brother was not a robber. She explained that Marcus was a decorated Marine who had recently returned from deployment. The sergeant seemed skeptical but agreed to pass along a message that Nina had come looking for him. Meanwhile, Colonel Harrison had been making more calls. He contacted the military legal office and asked them to look into the situation. He also reached out to several contacts he had in law enforcement to see if anyone could help locate Marcus. One of Harrison's contacts was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake from the Navy Legal Office, who had experience dealing with situations where military personnel were arrested by civilian authorities. Blake agreed to make some inquiries and see what she could find out. Blake's investigation led her to discover that there had indeed been an arrest in Chicago that day, involving someone claiming to be military. She was able to access more detailed records and confirmed that the person in custody was Marcus Johnson, a decorated Marine sniper with an exemplary service record. Blake immediately called Colonel Harrison with the news. "Steve, I found him. Marcus Johnson is being held at the Chicago Police Department on robbery charges. From what I can tell, this appears to be a case of mistaken identity." Harrison felt both relief and anger. Relief that Marcus had been found and was apparently safe, and anger that a decorated Marine was being treated like a common criminal. He knew Marcus's full service record, including the classified details of their mission on New Titan. "Sarah, I need you to understand something," Harrison said carefully. "Marcus Johnson isn't just any Marine. He's the Marine who single-handedly saved the New Titan colony. His actions during that deployment were extraordinary, and he's been recommended for the highest honors." Blake understood the implications immediately. If Marcus was indeed the hero of New Titan, then his arrest was not just a case of mistaken identity, but a serious injustice being done to someone who had risked his life for his country. "I'll contact the Chicago authorities immediately," Blake promised. "This needs to be resolved quickly and properly." As Blake began making urgent phone calls to Chicago, Colonel Harrison called Danny Martinez back to update him on the situation. Danny was shocked to learn that Marcus was in jail but relieved to know where he was. "What do we do now?" "Colonel?" Danny asked. "We make sure Marcus gets the justice and respect he deserves," Harrison replied firmly. "And we make sure this never happens to another Marine." Marcus Johnson walked slowly through Grant Park in downtown Chicago, feeling the warm afternoon sun on his face. He had just finished his appointment at the VA hospital and decided to take a longer route back to his hotel. The park was busy with families having picnics and children playing on the playground. Marcus smiled as he watched a young boy try to catch a frisbee that was too big for his small hands. 3 months had passed since Marcus returned from his deployment on New Titan, one of the Outer Rim colonies. The mission had been classified, but it involved protecting human settlements from alien raiders who had been attacking supply convoys. As a Marine sniper, Marcus had spent weeks in the Rocky Mountains surrounding the main settlement, watching for threats through his scope. The work had been dangerous but necessary. Now back on Earth, Marcus was trying to adjust to civilian life again. The doctors at the VA had cleared him for duty, but he was taking some time off before his next assignment. His sister Nina lived in Chicago and had been asking him to visit for months. Finally, he had agreed to spend a week with her and her family. Marcus stopped at a bench near the lake and sat down. He pulled out his phone to check the time. Nina would be getting off work at the hospital soon, and they had plans to meet for dinner. As he sat there, he noticed how peaceful everything seemed compared to the constant alertness required on New Titan. Suddenly, the peaceful afternoon was shattered by the sound of shouting and running feet. Marcus looked up to see a man in a dark hoodie running across the park, clutching what appeared to be a bag. Behind him, an elderly store clerk was pointing and yelling that his store had been robbed. Marcus stood up instinctively, his military training kicking in. He assessed the situation quickly. The robber was heading toward the crowded playground area, where families with children were gathered. Marcus began moving in that direction, not to pursue the suspect, but to make sure no civilians got hurt if the situation escalated. Within minutes, police sirens filled the air. 2 patrol cars pulled up to the park entrance and 4 officers jumped out. Marcus could see they were scanning the area, looking for the suspect who had already disappeared into the nearby streets. Officer Jake Murphy was the first to spot Marcus. He saw a tall black man in jeans and a t-shirt standing near the playground, watching the police response. To Murphy, who had only heard a vague description of the suspect over the radio, Marcus seemed to fit what little they knew. "You there? Stop right where you are," Murphy called out as he approached Marcus with his hand resting on his weapon. Marcus turned calmly toward the officer and raised his hand slightly to show he was not a threat. "Officer, I think you're looking for someone else. I was just sitting on that bench when the robbery happened." Murphy's partner, Officer Lisa Rodriguez, had circled around behind Marcus. She was young and nervous, having only been on the force for 8 months. The situation felt tense to her, and she was following Murphy's lead. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Murphy ordered, pulling out his handcuffs. Marcus remained calm but firm. "Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'm a United States Marine and I have identification in my wallet. The person you're looking for ran in the opposite direction about 5 minutes ago." Murphy was not interested in listening. The pressure to make an arrest was high, and Marcus was the only person in the area who seemed to match any part of the suspect description. "I said turn around now." Marcus complied, knowing that resisting would only make the situation worse. As Murphy roughly grabbed his arms to cuff him, Marcus tried again to explain. "My military ID is in my back pocket. I just returned from deployment 3 months ago. I was visiting the VA hospital today." Rodriguez searched Marcus's pockets and found his wallet. Inside were his military ID, driver's license, and VA appointment card from that morning. She showed them to Murphy, but he barely glanced at them. "Anyone can get fake IDs made," Murphy said dismissively. "We'll sort this out at the station." A small crowd had gathered to watch the arrest. Some people were taking pictures with their phones, which made Murphy more aggressive. He wanted to get Marcus into the patrol car quickly and away from the public attention. "This is a mistake," Marcus said as they led him toward the car. "I served my country for 6 years. I've never been arrested for anything in my life." An elderly woman who had been feeding pigeons near the bench where Marcus was sitting spoke up. "Officer, that young man was sitting peacefully on the bench when the robbery happened. He didn't run anywhere." Murphy ignored the witness and pushed Marcus into the back seat of the patrol car. The metal mesh between the front and back seats made Marcus feel trapped. He had been in dangerous situations before during his military service, but this felt different. Here, in his own country, he was being treated like a criminal despite having done nothing wrong. As the car pulled away from the park, Marcus could see through the window that other officers were questioning the elderly store clerk. He hoped they would get a proper description of the real suspect and realize their mistake quickly. During the ride to the police station, Marcus tried to stay calm by thinking about his training. His drill instructor had always taught them that staying level-headed in difficult situations was the key to survival. He thought about his sister Nina and how worried she would be when he didn't show up for dinner. The patrol car pulled into the police station parking lot 20 minutes later. Marcus could see the building was busy with officers coming and going. He hoped that once they got inside and ran his information through their system, they would see that he was telling the truth about his military service. Murphy opened the car door and helped Marcus out. Despite the handcuffs and the situation, Marcus maintained his military bearing. He stood straight and looked ahead as they walked toward the building entrance. "We'll get this sorted out quickly," Rodriguez said quietly to Marcus as they walked. She seemed less certain about the arrest than her partner. Marcus nodded to her. "I hope so, officer. I really hope so." Tuesday morning brought an even larger crowd to the Cook County Courthouse. Word had spread overnight that a four-star general would be appearing in the Marcus Johnson case, and news crews from national networks had joined the local media. Veterans from across the Midwest had traveled to Chicago to show their support, and the courthouse steps were filled with people holding American flags and signs supporting Marcus. Inside the courthouse, Judge Margaret Stone was preparing for what she now understood would be a much more significant hearing than she had originally anticipated. Her clerk had informed her that General Patricia Adams would be arriving shortly, and Stone was curious about what the general might reveal about Marcus Johnson's military service. Marcus arrived at the courthouse with his sister Nina and lawyer Carl Washington, again wearing his dress blue uniform. As they walked through the crowd, Marcus was approached by several veterans who thanked him for his service and expressed their support. The attention still felt strange to Marcus, who had always been a private person. Carl Washington had spent much of the previous evening on the phone with military legal officers, preparing for General Adams' testimony. He had been given some basic information about Marcus's service on New Titan, but many details remained classified. Washington understood that whatever the general revealed in court would likely be significant. Assistant District Attorney Helen Park was feeling increasingly uncomfortable about the case. What had started as a simple matter of dropping charges against a wrongfully arrested suspect had become a major public relations challenge for the police department and the prosecutor's office. Park had received several calls from her supervisors asking her to resolve the matter as quickly as possible. Detective Ryan Clark and Police Chief Robert Kane were both present in the courtroom, looking nervous about the attention the case was receiving. Kane in particular was worried about how the department would be portrayed in the media if the hearing revealed serious misconduct by his officers. At exactly 10 o'clock, the courtroom doors opened and General Patricia Adams entered, accompanied by two military aides. The general was an impressive figure in her dress blue uniform, with 4 stars clearly visible on her shoulders and rows of ribbons across her chest. The entire courtroom fell silent as she walked down the center aisle. Marcus stood at attention when he saw General Adams, as did several veterans in the gallery. The general nodded to Marcus with a slight smile before taking her seat in the witness area. Judge Stone called the court to order and addressed the unexpected presence of such a high-ranking military officer. "General Adams, I understand you've requested to testify as a character witness for Staff Sergeant Johnson." General Adams stood and spoke in a clear, commanding voice. "Yes, Your Honor. I have information about Staff Sergeant Johnson's service record that I believe is essential for this court to understand." Carl Washington approached the bench. "Your Honor, I request permission to call General Adams as a witness at this time." Judge Stone granted the request and General Adams was sworn in. As she took the witness stand, the courtroom remained completely silent. Even the court reporters seemed to sense that they were about to hear something extraordinary. Washington began his questioning carefully. "General Adams, can you please state your position and relationship to Staff Sergeant Johnson?" "I am General Patricia Adams, a 4-star general in the United States Marine Corps," she replied. "I am the commanding general responsible for Marine operations in the Outer Rim colonies, including the mission that Staff Sergeant Johnson recently completed on New Titan. General, Are you familiar with Staff Sergeant Johnson's service record? I am intimately familiar with his service record, Adams replied. In fact, I personally recommended Staff Sergeant Johnson for the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions during the New Titan mission. A murmur went through the courtroom. The Congressional Medal of Honor was the highest military decoration in the United States, and very few people had ever received it. Judge Stone leaned forward with obvious interest. Washington continued his questioning. General, can you tell the court about the New Titan mission? General Adams looked directly at Judge Stone as she began to speak. Your Honor, 6 months ago, the civilian colony on New Titan came under attack by hostile alien forces. Over 10,000 civilians were trapped in the main settlement, unable to evacuate due to enemy sniper positions in the surrounding mountains. She paused for a moment before continuing. Staff Sergeant Johnson was part of a small Marine unit sent to break the siege and protect those civilians. What he accomplished during that mission was extraordinary by any measure. Can you be more specific about Staff Sergeant Johnson's actions? Washington asked. Staff Sergeant Johnson positioned himself alone in the mountains surrounding the colony, Adams explained. For 3 days, with minimal food, water, or rest, he systematically eliminated enemy sniper positions that were preventing our rescue operations. His precise shooting allowed our ground forces to reach the trapped civilians. The courtroom was completely silent as General Adams continued her testimony. On the final day of the mission, when the enemy launched a desperate assault on the civilian shelters, Staff Sergeant Johnson held his position despite being surrounded and outnumbered. His actions that day directly saved the lives of over 10,000 American citizens. Judge Stone was clearly moved by the testimony. General Adams, are you saying that Staff Sergeant Johnson is a war hero? Your Honor, Marcus Johnson is more than a war hero, Adams replied firmly. He is one of the finest Marines I have ever had the privilege to command, and his actions on New Titan represent the very best of American military tradition. Carl Washington asked one final question. General, in your professional opinion, is Staff Sergeant Johnson capable of committing armed robbery? General Adams looked directly at Marcus before answering. Mr. Washington, the idea that Marcus Johnson would commit any crime is not just unlikely, it is impossible. This is a Marine who risked his life to protect innocent civilians he had never met. The suggestion that he would harm or threaten any American citizen is completely contrary to everything he represents. During cross-examination, Assistant District Attorney Park asked only a few basic questions. It was clear that she had no desire to challenge the testimony of a 4-star general about a Medal of Honor recipient. After General Adams completed her testimony, she stood and approached Marcus at the defendant's table. The general extended her hand to Marcus, who stood and shook it firmly. Staff Sergeant Johnson, I want to formally apologize to you on behalf of the United States Marine Corps for the treatment you have received. General Adams said loudly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. You have served your country with extraordinary distinction, and you deserve far better than this. Marcus remained at attention. Thank you, General. It's an honor to serve under your command. General Adams then turned to address Judge Stone directly. Your Honor, I have brought with me the paperwork to officially present Staff Sergeant Johnson with the Congressional Medal of Honor, which has been approved but not yet formally awarded. With the court's permission, I would like to present this decoration now. Judge Stone was clearly surprised but granted permission for the ceremony. General Adams' aide brought forward a presentation case containing the medal, and the general asked Marcus to stand before the bench. Staff Sergeant Marcus Johnson, by order of the President of the United States and with the authorization of Congress, you are hereby awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of your life above and beyond the call of duty during combat operations on New Titan. General Adams placed the medal around Marcus's neck as the entire courtroom erupted in applause. Veterans in the gallery stood and saluted while others wiped tears from their eyes. Even some of the police officers present seemed moved by the ceremony. Detective Clark watched the proceedings with a growing sense of shame. He realized that he had not only arrested an innocent man, but had arrested one of the most decorated heroes in the Marine Corps. The magnitude of his mistake was becoming clear to everyone in the courtroom. Judge Stone allowed the applause to continue for several minutes before calling for order. When the courtroom finally quieted, she looked at the prosecution table with obvious displeasure. Ms. Park, Does the state have anything to add before I issue my ruling in this matter? Judge Stone asked. Assistant District Attorney Park stood slowly. Your Honor, in light of the testimony we have heard today, the state formally apologizes to Staff Sergeant Johnson and requests that all charges be dismissed with prejudice. Judge Stone nodded grimly. The charges are dismissed with prejudice, and the record will reflect that Staff Sergeant Johnson was completely innocent of any wrongdoing. This court finds that he was wrongfully arrested and that his civil rights were violated. As the hearing concluded, General Adams spoke privately with Marcus about his future in the Marine Corps and thanked him again for his extraordinary service. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the impact of what had happened that day would be felt far beyond the courthouse walls.